Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site that covers, of course, your Arizona Cardinals. With me with an episode 753, our second show of the week, Seth Cox, my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And we still don't have a defensive coordinator set, but one more thing we're going to talk about today is the fact that another defensive coordinator candidate came out of nowhere, and it's not from the Rams, but it is from the NFC West. Could the Cardinals poach someone from the world champion Seattle Seahawks staff? As we got the report today, Carl's the defensive backs coach and passing coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. He's been there since 2022. Interviewed for the Cardinals DC job, a guy who also was a defensive backs coach for the Minnesota Vikings and then has vast college experience coaching defensive backs, Alabama, Texas Tech, Louisiana Tech, and dating back since 2015. But we talked about on the last show, Seth, just like what's happening with the defensive coordinator position, and now we've got another candidate. And what do you think of this guy?
From an experience standpoint, the guy has done it all, man. I mean, you look at it, going through his list, started out at Delta State as a graduate assistant, played at McMurray, which I honestly I'm not familiar with McMurray. I was thinking it was McMurray State, but it's not. It's McMurray, which is in McMurray University or McMurray College, which is in Jacksonville,
Abilene, Texas.
Oh, Abilene, Texas. Sorry.
It's a private Methodist university.
Yeah. So I've never heard of it. Delta State and then Tuscaloosa College. Not overly familiar with that, but then he went to Southeastern Louisiana. SLU is a FCS program, was the linebackers coach for 2 years and then a defensive coordinator for a year. So he's got a little bit of experience calling plays. What was interesting about that is they made the FCS playoffs. They won a division title when he was calling defensive plays, and then he made the jump to the FBS level at the time with Louisiana Tech, and then was with our old friend Cliff Kingsbury at Texas Tech, coaching defensive backs. Then kind of made a big jump, right? Goes from Texas Tech to Alabama. Coaches 3 years under Nick Saban and Pete Golding, who is obviously now the Ole Miss head coach, but was the Ole Miss defensive coordinator for a long time. And so obviously part of that Alabama program, and then won a national title with Alabama in 2020. Now I will say this, the thing that we know about Nick Saban is that he loved to still coach, and he would coach the defensive backs. Sorry, Jessica, the allergies bothering me. But he would still coach the defensive backs. So I always am very, wary of being like, Alabama defensive back coach. But he showed me enough in his time in the NFL that he knows what he's doing. Coached the Minnesota Vikings in 2021, and then has been with the Seahawks since 2022. So, he was part of the Pete Carroll staff in 2022 and then obviously Mike McDonald the last 2 years, very involved in coaching an excellent defensive backs group.
Dates back several years because you're looking at the defensive backs that they've got: Kobe Bryant, Julian Love. Before that, Quandre Diggs, Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon. So he's been coaching some really. They've been, his position group has been good for several years.
And I like that. Like, I like the fact that he's done it. And obviously, when you look at coaches, there's this buildup, right? And we can look at Mike McDonald, and linebackers coach, graduate assistants, defensive quality control coach at Georgia, but then got his cut his teeth in the NFL with the Ravens, right? Coaching intern, defensive assistant, defensive back coach, linebackers coach. And then one brother helped out another brother and sent him to Michigan to be the DC. And then guess what happened after that? He went back to Baltimore to be the DC for the other brother. And then obviously now the Seattle Seahawks head coach. So like, the trajectory of Scott is the next stop is to get a shot at being a defense coordinator, and I get it from a Cardinals perspective, right? Jess, let's be honest. It's always really stressful when you're the first team that takes a bite out of that apple, right? Like you have a guy that isn't homegrown in the way Mike McDonald was. You have a guy that's really pushed himself through the ranks. And we talked about Michael Merritt, right? The running back coach that they're reportedly going to hire. And we looked at what he did, in his trajectory to become an NFL running back coach. And I think if this hire was just as a DB's coach, kind of like what we saw with the wide receiver coach that we'll talk about shortly, I think everybody would be 100% on board. But when you take that leap, right, and you give a guy the first time really in his career, it's been over a decade since this dude called plays in games. Like, it is a stressful proposition for a team that or a fan base, I should say, that is probably like, last time we went with an inexperienced play caller, we got Nick Rallis, and that didn't work out. We had Al Holcomb, and that didn't work out, right? Like
James Betcher, even.
Yeah, and so I get the questions, but this dude has earned his chance. This dude deserves a chance, and if it fails, it's going to be one of those things that it'll fail probably no matter where he was, right? And he'll just go back to being a DB coach. But I honestly like who he's cut his teeth under from a defensive.
Mike Zimmer, Pete Carroll. So he was under Mike Zimmer, obviously Mike McDonald, and who was the DC that there at the end for Seattle with Pete Carroll?
Let me double check real quick. But also, I like him being under Saban and Pete Golding in Alabama.
Yeah.
Like that's not like, those are two really, really smart defensive minds. And so all of those names, Clint Hurt. And so all of those names are impressive, man. They really, really are impressive.
Yeah. And you brought it up too. The Cardinals have a new receivers coach. The offensive staff is filling out, because we do know, like, you've got Mike LaFleur, you've got the offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, and the Cardinals are getting a guy who has been with some great receivers, and that would be the Vikings assistant receivers coach Tony Sorrentino, coaching the likes of Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. He's going to be the Cardinals' new receivers coach, to work with Marvin Harrison and Michael Wilson and whoever they end up bringing in. And the interesting thing is that the connection has no connection to LaFleur, but he was with Nathaniel Hackett on the Jacksonville Jaguars back in 2015 when Hackett was the QB coach in Jacksonville, and Sorrentino was an assistant receivers coach there, so that they kind of got that. And then, Hackett went on to be an offensive coordinator and head coach and going there. And Sorrentino's been continue on the same trajectory, but now gets that full position coach job for the Cardinals. You kind of got to like that with the receivers that he's been working with over the last few years.
Yeah, and with a guy like Tony Sorrentino, it's always a chicken egg question I have, and it's not a negative in any way, but it's like, were they really good because of Sorrentino, or were they just going to be really good? And Sorrentino was able to, kind of ride those coattails. Like, and again, it's not his fault. He can only coach who's in play with them. But also, we do have to acknowledge that Sorrentino got there in 2021. Helping Jefferson get to the next level. But in 2020, Jefferson's rookie season, I believe that was the year before Sorrentino got there, right? That he still had 88 receptions for 1,400 yards. So yes. It's not, the jump that he had under Sorrentino was incredibly impressive. But also, the reality of the situation is he's the best receiver in the NFL, maybe. Like, this is the way I explain it to people. Now, he'd have to do this for another 5 to 6 years, but everything that Cardinals fans feel about Larry Fitzgerald, Justin Jefferson is doing it better thus far through 6 seasons in the NFL. And so again, would we give their wide receivers coach credit for what Fitz did? Now I know we do give some credit to Todd Haley to help mold him, right? But again, it wasn't like Fitz was a bum or anything, right? Like, Fitz was still Fitz. It just took a little bit of a push to see him reach that next level. In 2005, before Todd Haley even got here or spoke to him, he still had 103 receptions, led the NFL in 1,400 yards. So, again, it's a chicken egg thing. I don't think it's a bad hire in any shape or form. I mean, I'm always of the belief that this is the natural progression for these guys.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see what they can do with somebody like Sorrentino, and if he can help a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. Reach the next level, if he can help a guy like Michael Wilson maintain kind of what he did at the end of last year, and even improve on it, right?
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Here at Podcast, the Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on and talk about our next topic that we have on tap, and that would be talking about Kyler Murray's trade value and what we think is going to happen with him. That's coming up next on Recipe Red. We're back on the Rise Here podcast, the Star Cardinals Talk on the Web. We did talk about kind of what we think is going to happen to the quarterback position, but since it's come up, there's been projected the value that Murray might have, and honestly, it's not a lot. There's a lot of factors for that. I can't remember who it was. I think it was for ESPN. That was Ben Solak for ESPN, was projecting what he figured the Cardinals could get for Kyler Murray in a trade. And ultimately, it was only kind of a day 3 pick for a lot of reasons. While his contract isn't terrible for some other team to pick up, basically they're committing about $77 million, basically all guaranteed for 2 seasons for a quarterback. And for a good quarterback, that's not a bad contract. But are teams going to look at Kyler Murray as that, like a as a sought after quarterback. Remember the conversation we had with the Matthew Stafford trade when they traded Jared Goff, and we wondered, was Goff viewed as an asset or a liability for Detroit? Now, Jared Goff has worked out wonderfully for them, but at the time there was a lot of question as to how he was viewed. Was he viewed like, was he a throw into that deal as a as something that was a devalued thing, kind of like when the Cardinals threw in Jonathan Cooper in the Chandler Jones trade to the Patriots, because ultimately they were going to move on from Cooper, and it kind of saves them from cutting him. Did they take him on as a liability or as an asset? Now that the question is a team going to look at Kyler Murray as a veteran flyer? And at a veteran flyer, you don't pay $77 million over 2 years. That's not, you don't do that. So that's when you go get the 1 year, $13 million deal that like Daniel Jones got. That's the type of thing that you get. Sam Darnold was a little bit, it wasn't exactly a flyer. It was, we believe in you mostly. But then, like, there's a lot of factors. You've got the money committed to it. So how is he going to be viewed? Is he going to be viewed as a legitimate starting quarterback? Is he going to be viewed as, he's a risk? And then, and this is the thing for me the whole time of like, the Cardinals messed this situation up so badly, is by keeping him on injured reserve and letting the report come out that his foot just never got better. What message are you sending to teams? So now you have a very athletic quarterback who's a playmaker, who does some of his best work outside of the pocket, who moves, and now he has a lingering foot injury that will not heal. That, I don't like. Donnie Druin projects that ultimately the Cardinals will get like a 3rd round pick that could be a 2nd round pick. I'm not so sure the Cardinals will even be able to trade him.
I was thinking if they do trade him, it would be like a 5th or 6th round pick that like went to a 4th, maybe.
Yeah. And I wonder if a team's like, because Tua Tagovailoa, he's on his way out of Miami, and the report came out that they are willing to take on some of that salary. Now Kyler has a $17.5 million roster bonus coming due on March 15th. And that, if the Cardinals were to eat that and pay that out before trading him, that would then drop roughly the guarantees that it would be 2 years for about $60 million, which is much more palatable for a decent NFL quarterback. But there hasn't been any report the Cards will be willing to do that. And so, like, I even wonder if someone would even trade for him. Like, you go 6th rounder, that could be a 4th rounder. That feels like nothing. But I'm not convinced the Cardinals, like, we both think that the Cardinals are going to move on from both Kyler Murray and Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett, you can get a 3rd round pick for. I think they're going to end up having to cut Kyler Murray, much like how they had to cut DeAndre Hopkins, and they're just going to have to bite the bullet. They're going to have to pay him. they're going to have to lose $2 million. No, they'll do it. They'll do it as a post June 1st designation, and so they'll save a little money, but they'll have another $7 million of dead money next year. But they will be literally paying Kyler Murray to play for another team, because then he'll allow him to sign with everyone at that. So I'm not going to be able to get a trade, because I think the situation is just too difficult, unless there's a team that still views Kyler Murray as a very good player. But if you're an NFL team and you've got the Cardinals in the situation they are, why would you play that hand?
Right. And that's what the question becomes, is why? Why would anybody push to have that, knowing that the Cardinals are at their wits' end and don't really have any options outside of what you just said? So the question becomes, who what is the incentive for a team? So you basically are saying, to your point, Jess, like you either take on a bunch of salary or you take on a bunch of dead money. Like either way, so you either take on salary to get some type of asset back, or you take on dead money to just move on. And that's what you have to make your decision about, right? So I think if they were to get something, like I said, maybe you get a fifth that becomes a fourth, maybe you get a sixth that becomes a fifth. Now I do think they could get like a day 3 pick that could transfer to a day 2 pick based on playing time and incentives and things like that, while they also eat money, right? But the reality of the situation is they've got to make a decision shortly.
Yes, they do.
And
It's March 15th is the big day. That's when, if cut, then the Cardinals are just in a bad situation. Like they either trade him and because the contract basically triggers all of his guarantees for next year.
Yeah.
So either way, if they cut him, well, that's a different story. But yeah, like it's at the point, and we've talked about, like, if the expectation is for Mike LaFleur to compete in year one, we'll have to be like, Kyler Murray is the best quarterback they're going to get, is the best possible option for 2026 if they want to try and compete at all. Like no one, like Kirk Cousins not doing that. You could say Aaron Rodgers, but it feels like Aaron Rodgers, and we talked about how Aaron Rodgers might fit because of the relationship with Nathaniel Hackett, but it really feels like Aaron Rodgers is Steelers or retirement, especially once they got Mike McCarthy there as head coach. Aaron Rodgers, I think, would be the one exception of the available quarterbacks. Kyler Murray's better than Malik Willis. Kyler Murray's better than Jacoby Brissett. Kyler Murray is better than Kirk Cousins. Kyler Murray is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Kyler Murray is better than any of these scrap heap quarterbacks that are going to be available, and better probably than any quarterback that they could acquire in the draft this year. So, but we know that basically they have to move on for Kyler, just the way they burned that bridge and the way fans view things. There's just no good way for Kyler to return unless Mike LaFleur comes out with the same enthusiasm that Jonathan Gannon did when he was head coach.
Correct. And like that's going to be really difficult to sell to the fan base based on, the way that they went about this at the end. And that's something that we've talked about, is they really on their own screwed up this whole entire situation, because they've made it worse than it needed to be. But that's a common thread amongst this organization, right?
Yeah. So ultimately, do you believe he will be traded or cut?
Cut. He's going to get cut. Like I'd be shocked.
It'll be DeAndre Hopkins all over again, because everywhere in the NFL played chicken with the Cardinals when it came to DeAndre Hopkins, because he was in the same type of contract situation, and everyone's like, no. And
they're going to do the same thing, man. They're going to play chicken with him. They're going to say, we dare you to keep him, dare you to hold on to that. And because that's the thing, is like, if they don't make the move before March, then like you said, it's so much money, and then you don't have any incentive to trade him.
Right. And ultimately, here's the downside to it. They're going to have to cut him with the post June 1st, which means they're going to carry his hit until June 2nd. Now, granted, the Cardinals do have cap space, but yeah, I ultimately believe Jacoby Brissett will be traded and Kyler Murray will get cut, and then we'll have two new quarterbacks in this locker room. Because honestly, why would Mike LaFleur do it unless he believed in Kyler? Why would you do it any other way? Why would you do it any other way? Take this job and then go with Jacoby, and unless tank, like I don't want to see them tank again. Like, I know it's probably better, but the downside to that is simply this: you don't know how to win. As we just saw, that they got better, they got competitive, but when things got high leverage, at the back half of 2024, that's a team that didn't know how to win. They didn't know how to win. And that carried over to the next year. My goodness. Let's move on to the next one. Coming to next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk of the Web. The first time we're talking about the roster. We're going to talk about the offensive side of the ball, the positional needs that what do they need to address at each of the positions this offseason. That's coming next at Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the Web. The offensive side of the ball, positions of need. Let's kind of run through this. We usually spread this out, but we'll talk more about it next week. But we've already talked about the quarterback position, Seth. Would you agree that they need both a new starting and backup quarterback this offseason?
Yeah, it sounds like that's going to be a necessity if they want to move forward with where they're at, because it seems like what they have is going to be moving on.
Yeah, and maybe Jacoby remains as the backup, but if the Jacoby remains as the backup, then they're going to have to get someone with enough reputation cachet for him to be happy or to accept being a backup to them after starting 12 games last year, especially as kind of Jacoby's thing is that he wants to play, even if they're losing. He wants to play. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes, because he doesn't have the relationship with Nathaniel Hackett or Mike LaFleur that he had with Bonnie Ossenfort, with Drew Petzing ultimately. And so we'll have to see how that goes. Now, running back, an interesting thing, because they could almost simply completely make up the room, remake the room. James Conner is entering year 3 of his contract. He's going to be 31 years old. He's coming off a major injury. Trey Benson enters year 3. Bam Knight and Amari DiMercato are going to be free agents. They need to remake that room, don't they?
Yeah, and they need to remake the room in what Mike LaFleur wants. As much as we loved what James Conner was and did, you have to kind of move on. Now, if he wants to come back in a veteran backup role, on a veteran minimum type contract, I don't think that's a problem, but he has to be willing to do that. And that's also not something that he has to do, right? Like if he doesn't want to, then you just have to move on and allow him to test the market and see what others think of him.
Yeah. The wide receiver room, they're in a pretty good spot, but they're very top heavy right now. You've got Harrison, you've got Wilson, and then after that, it's a complete unit. Like who they literally have nobody else.
Yeah, and what happens is you have a room right now of guys that you either know what you have or you're hoping that you know what you have. You're hoping that you have more of Michael Wilson, right? You're hoping that Marvin Harrison Jr. or you're hoping that you can continue to count on Michael Wilson like you did this year. You're hoping that Marvin Harrison Jr. takes that next step. But the other names under contract right now are Xavier Weaver, Jalen Brooks, Tawan Palmer, and Andre Bocellia, which, I mean, Bocellia will be back on the roster like he is every offseason. But outside of that, like, there's no Zay Jones, there's no Greg Dortch, Simi Fahoku's gone. Like, all that depth is gone. So you look at it, it's a need because you have no depth, but it's not a need where you have to address it like on day one of free agency or day one of the draft, right?
Yeah. The tight end position seemingly is all right. Like, I mean, you've got Trey McBride.
Yeah, you're just hopeful about Tip's recovery, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the biggest thing.
But the good thing is, honestly, now Elijah Higgins is going to be, like, does he have a free agent? No, I think he's got one more year left.
Yeah, he's still under contract.
Yeah, he's got one more year because he was claimed off waivers after being drafted. So they've got him. And honestly, if Tip's not, you can find a blocking tight end. There's a million guys like that around the league who don't have the athletic upside to rhyme it, but can fill that role quite well. So they're okay in the tight end room right now, which leads us to the offensive line. Left tackle, okay, we're okay there. Heck, on the offensive line, we definitely, unless they really feel strongly about Isaiah Adams and John Gaines, you're looking at 2, 3, and depending on depending on LaFleur's belief in Yelda Froholt entering the final year of his deal, you are looking at least I'm betting 3. Well, I guess technically Evan Brown is still under contract. Technically, he's still under contract. Oh, and if you guys didn't catch the reason, this was far less. It was sad. It was very sad, but it was far less sinister as what we suspected, which was just there was a family issue. Oh, just stay home because we're moving on. It was a baby, and yeah. So Evan Brown could be back. If that's the case, you're looking at least 2 starting jobs. But there's questions at 3, maybe 4 position, depending on what they do at center.
Right. And there's really only, as you're mentioning, there's really only not a question at left tackle. And outside of that, everything's up for grabs. And the thing that we noticed about these teams that are good, right, is that they tend to not wait too long on the misses. And I'm not saying that Isaiah Adams is a miss. What I'm saying is, if they deem Isaiah Adams a miss, the good teams are moving on after 2 years. There's not going to be hey, let's give him a third year and see what happens. That's what teams that are bringing back Jacoby Brissett and running things back with a lot of players do, right? That's what organizations that are hey, there's Arch Manning and there's, this guy and that guy coming out in the draft next year. So if we're bad, it wouldn't be the worst thing. It's okay, great. Now we're starting the Mike LaFleur era like we started the Jonathan Gannon era of well, if you lose, it's okay because there's a prize at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah. And so right tackle, essential. There's a small chance they like Josh Fryer. Small chance. But I wouldn't bank on him. You bring him back hoping that he can become something okay, but don't make plans based on Josh Fryer.
No, Josh Fryer is not a guy you make plans because of.
Yes. Isaiah Adams, John Gaines, I don't know, Yelda Froholt, is Yelda still their guy? That was one of the best moves that Monty Ossenfort made early on in bringing him over on that contract. And he turned into pretty solid center. He did not have a great year last year, and he is entering the final year of his contract. So maybe they have different plans, and this is one of the fun things about a new coaching staff, because we're going to see some of these coaches, whether it's LaFleur or Hackett, so guys that are players with connections with these coaches and systems, they're going to be on this roster at different positions. It was like Kaiser White. That was 100%. Hey, we have to bring him in. That kind of like Jimmy Garoppolo feels like a really, really natural fit here because you get a quarterback in who knows the offensive system and things like that. We'll have to take a look at the offensive line market and who are those guys, in Green Bay and LA and the Jets maybe, who have some connection to this offensive staff. But yeah, it's the offensive line has major questions, and I guess we just the one thing we need to make sure we hope is that Paris Johnson can get through a season healthy and not have more knee issues, because my goodness, he played really well last year. He was on the cusp, and then he got hurt again. if he can stay healthy for a full year, we're looking at a guy that will get Pro Bowl talk, especially if Trent Williams retires. There is a spot there to be taken, and Johnson could do it.
And real quick before we finish this episode up, I just do want to say too, like all the hires, all of the like coaching staff stuff. I'm trying to run back when exactly Robert Saleh got hired by the Titans. And by the way, I get it. Other teams do a way better job of talking about the hires that they make. I get it that the Titans, right after they hired Saleh, they hired Brian Dable, and they post about that, and then they hired Gus Bradley, and they post about that, and the Cardinals haven't even posted about anybody but Michael LaFleur since they made the hire. That being said, the Titans looks like it was on the 28th, I want to say 28th-ish, they hired Robert Saleh, and they just announced, like literally 40 minutes ago, we're recording at 5 p.m. Arizona time on Thursday, the 12th of February. They literally just announced their entire coaching staff. So I get it. They had already made official the Dable and the Gus Bradley and the John Fossil stuff, and that's cool because it's nice that your favorite football team gives you updates on what's happening in the organization. However, 2-ish plus weeks is kind of standard. It's not absurd to be 15 days out from a hire and just now getting all of that information. So while it would be nice for them to acknowledge anything, Jess and I have said that over and over and over again. The reality is it's not completely unheard of that they haven't, right?
I'd expect probably early next week I'll have to go back and look at the emails of when back in 2023, when they hired Jonathan Gannon, back in 2019, when they hired Cliff Kingsbury, how long, like when that email came along. And it kind of feels, what's interesting, guess who we haven't heard is moving on anywhere else?
Nick Rallis.
Coach.
Oh yeah.
Nick Rallis, Justin Fry. Like there's a bunch of guys that you're like, they're still around. And every day goes by that Nick Rallis hasn't moved on makes me think Nick Rallis is the defensive coordinator.
Yeah. That's what's weird. But yeah, I mean, you look at it and it's really hard, man. It really, really is difficult to look at other organizations like the Titans, who have been a mess, just like the Cardinals, maybe even worse than the Cardinals recently, and that you're seeing like, hey, they hired a coach, hey, they hired a special teams coordinator, hey, they hired an OC, hey, they hired a DC, and they're talking about it on on their social media. And yes, it would be wonderful if Cardinals fans were able to have that same thought process, right? But we're not, and it's not surprising. But again, 2 weeks looking at it, it's been a little over a week. I mean, I guess it's been 11 days. So, sometime next week probably will be when we get all that information of, Nick Rallis and Justin Fry and all those guys as part of the staff still.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Series podcast, the best ever Cardinals talk on the web. We'll be back next week. We will be talking more like I'm sure maybe we'll get to talk about the coaching staff, but we will dive more into the roster, the defensive side of the ball, who like free agents just to let go, potential cut candidates, all that coming over the next couple of weeks. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, rise up, Sea Red.